Welcome to SoberSmash. SoberSmash. Get to the core issues with King Scott and Dr. Joe and get SoberSmashed.
Welcome to SoberSmash Live. Today's special guest is Bart Blaskoff. He's a primary therapist and director of First Responders Program here at Treatment Partners. Now, podcast royalty, it is King Scott.
Thank you, Jonesy. Great seeing you, my brother from another mother. How you been, pal?
Oh, doing great, Scott.
You doing good?
Great. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm feeling real good today.
Fantastic.
I love our guest. You know, he's a member of our family, and he's the head of our First Responders Program at Treatment Partners of America. Bart, welcome.
I'm thrilled and honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Bart. You got a little extra intro there.
Right,
you got a little extra intro.
Got a little
You're
extra
special.
jolt.
I think Engineer Dee fell off her chair and whacked her head. I don't know. That's what it sounds like to me. I just want to remind all our viewers and listeners that you can write in any questions you may have for either Jonesy, myself, or Bart with any questions pertaining to today's show. It's about first responders, and Bart's going to tell us a little about what he does here at TPA and how we treat first responders. It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's actually very specialized. I am the director of the First Responders Program here at TPA. I'm really pleased to be a part, and I think it's something that's really overlooked. Being a former first responder myself, a former firefighter, I recognize that there is an extremely important method to approaching first responders due to the culture that first responders are living every day.
Now, you say you were, just to go back, just to qualify, you spent time as a first responder, fire department was your thing, right?
I did, yes. I was a firefighter with Warren Engine Company number 1 in the state of Nevada. It was the very first fire department. Started in 1863, and I was an...
Were you there from the start?
I was there from... I'm going to change my tone a little bit. We talk like this. I was there from the beginning. It was really, really good to be a part of that department, and that's where I learned my training, and that's where I trained with the Carson City Fire Department.
Good deal.
That's terrific. Did you find... I mean, obviously now you're in a position of being a therapist, and you've done a lot of things since then. But did you recognize that there may be some issues that they're dealing with, especially when it comes to things like addiction and trauma and other things back then?
Absolutely. You know, there's always been exposure, you know, as a firefighter, as a first responder, and each first responder situation is different and has unique exposure. You know, whereas a firefighter may be exposed to one thing, medical may be exposed to another. Being in a prison system, maybe there's another exposure. So that exposure has been there since the beginning. And I don't think it was as recognized back then, the dangers of that exposure, until, you know, recent years, a little bit more.
Okay. Well, you know, I guess there's a big similarity, because Scott, coming from the musical background, you saw a lot of things going on there. You were in the music industry as well, too. We have to point that out, don't
Do
we?
we got to bring up old stuff?
We have to.
I don't think we should go there. I heard his musical talents in the past. I don't know if we should go there. You know, when I first met Bart, he gave me a song of his that they were like flock of seagulls. And I have that vision of you in that, I don't know, spandex running around playing. And believe me, I got some funny pictures of me from the 80s, but I think that took the cake, brother.
I lived it.
That you really
I lived it.
You did live it.
It was good fun.
It was good stuff, though.
It was. Thank you.
It was good stuff. But, you know, on a serious note, you know, treating first responders is a big deal. And it gives you a lot of gratification. I mean, knowing that you can help somebody like that.
Yeah, it gives me a lot of gratification, especially since I had been involved in it. I think this journey kind of automatically took me this way. I've done stints in a lot of different things, and it just kind of circled right back to my roots of being a first responder and having friends as first responders. So.
And I know I spend a lot of time with the NYPD, and we do treat their officers and also New York Fire. And the men and women of these departments, they have a very tough job, day in and day out. And you just don't see what goes on every day and how they cope with that, and they go home to their families and try to leave it at work, but there's no way of doing that.
Yeah, either on the conscious or subconscious level, there's no way to do that. There's always going to be something. And the first responder culture is a very unique culture. You know, when we talk about first responders and how they cope, first responders, we're meant to be there for the people. And so we forget about ourselves. And so our emotions kind of turn off. And it's part of the culture to really not show your emotions up front and to kind of hold on to that. And that becomes a big problem because later on, if there's no way to release that stress, then that's where things start happening, where we start getting into ways to cope and, you know, maladaptive behaviors like substance abuse.
Is it like an oversimplification to say it's kind of like a hero complex? This is my job, is to help people and to save people. And then your own persona takes a back seat to everything else then, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would hesitate to use the word hero complex,
okay. Right.
But yes, you're correct in that, you know, when you are in this culture, there is a persona. You do perform for the public, and, you know, that's really part of the culture. So in certain respects, you do and can lose sight of other things, particularly when we start getting into like retirement, where you spend your whole life working this particular, you know, job, and then your purpose starts changing and you start wondering what your purpose is, because your purpose the whole time has been to help others.
We're getting a couple questions from Facebook here. James is writing in, do you think first responders have a difficult time recognizing PTSD and addiction?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think sometimes it's just a matter of admitting it, and admitting that they're having this problem.
Right.
You know, recently, you know, I'll use this example, is I had a firefighter's wife contact me regarding some problems that she was having with the husband, where the husband had witnessed a lot of death of children, and really didn't recognize the effects that had, and then consequently started isolating and removing himself from his own newborn child. So these are real things.
So it is that effect, like I spoke about a moment ago, where, you know, you're leaving a job, you're going home to your family, but you don't leave the job.
You don't. It comes home. It can come home with you, and that's where the cycle can get really messy, especially when or if the first responder starts using substances, and then that goes home, and that has an effect on the family life, and then that affects the child, and then the child goes through. So the cycle can actually continue on and on and on.
I got another question here from Ken. He says, do you think first responders think it's weak to ask for treatment or to seek it? He's a firefighter.
I think it depends on the individual. I think in general, due to the culture, it seems as if, and I don't know, you know, weak. I would say as a generality that maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me ask you this. Now we're talking about this, and hard for them to see the problem, but I think in cases of most addictions and traumas, there's always an element of denial. So I think from what I'm hearing from you, there's actually another level to this when you're talking about people like first responders, and this could probably stretch to everyone from fire to police to EMS to even veterans, that there's a different level of denial that has to be broken through beyond just the addiction itself.
Yes, I think there can be. I think that goes down to, again, it's really kind of individualized, and it's based upon the person themselves. I mean, we're all individuals, and we all handle trauma differently. We all handle situations differently. Some people, and interestingly enough, too, it's important to understand that each department has its own culture, or each environment has its own culture. The prison guard culture is going to be different from prison to prison, and the fire department culture is going to be different from department to department, police. So, you know, I think there's a lot of factors that play in, but it's understanding the general brother and sisterhood of this particular culture that becomes very important when we talk about therapy and this culture having trust in their therapist.
Absolutely.
Got another question here. I'm getting a lot of Facebook questions, which is good. He writes in, a friend of mine was a firefighter on 9/11, and shortly after that he became a addict addicted to drugs and alcohol. His life fell apart. Eventually he left the fire department on long-term disability. What kind of treatment could have helped him?
Wow. There's a lot of different treatments available for trauma. Probably the most effective treatment today for trauma is going to be EMDR, also brain spotting, of which I do both, coupled with other different approaches. I'm a therapist who likes to blend approaches. I like to take the most effective approaches to trauma, but also blend it with changing the mindset, which I think is really important, like cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy as well. So.
All right. Well, it definitely sounds to me like you have to be highly adaptive in this. Even if you understand the culture, there's so many subsects of that culture because of the different, first responders in Nevada, certainly different from first responders in New York and in Boston or wherever they might be. So you have to be highly adaptive. You can't just have a cookie cutter approach to this, right?
No, that's correct. I mean, there is no cookie cutter approach, I think, to any therapy. Every patient, every client needs to be treated as an individual and looked at as an individual. That has to be the approach. But the culture is extremely important when it comes to first responders.
I got another question here from Melissa. She writes, how do you tell someone who is a first responder that they might need to get help for addiction without making them feel worse about themselves?
That's a very, very good question.
Great questions, guys.
That's good.
Keep them coming.
I think support, understanding, again, knowing the culture, usually, now this also depends on whether the first responder has a family and married or not. Brothers and sisters will listen to brothers and sisters. So if you would utilize the culture to actually assist, then that would probably be the best route. So,
do you find it's been more effective here at TPA because you're a former first responder in treating the first responders that do come into our program?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
They identify better with you.
There's no doubt about it. First responders identify better with those who understand this culture.
Right.
Am I saying that it's, doesn't work any other way? No. But understanding this culture and understanding what they've been through and understanding how these systems work, because we're talking about systems as well,
right? That
becomes extremely important.
Got another question here. What's the most difficult obstacle in treating first responders?
These are great questions. It's the first responder themselves. Either they want the help or they don't. And I kind of reference back to, this situation that I had mentioned about another first responder who was struggling. They were unable to reach out and elected not to receive the help. And you can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink.
Sure.
So,
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Bart. Keep the questions coming in. Great questions, very informative, and we'll see you in 1 minute.
Welcome to Treatment Partners of America, your partner in recovery. Treatment Partners of America is a unique, state-of-the-art substance abuse facility. Our trained professionals first focus on finding the core issues in trauma that lead to addiction. With some of the best doctors, nurses, and behavioral health techs the industry has to offer. We offer personal one-on-one therapy 5 days a week, raising the bar to a higher level of standards. whether it's drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, gambling, sex and love addiction, or even relationship addiction. Treatment partners at work as specialists to treat and to help heal your addiction long term rather than attempt a temporary 30-day quick fix.
And we're back here on SoberSmash Live with our special guest, Bart Plaskoff, who is a primary therapist and the director of our first responder program at Treatment Partners. King Scott, take it away.
All right, Bart, getting a lot of questions for you. It's crazy how many we're getting.
It's fantastic. It's great.
Lauren just wrote in. She wants to know, how has your views on addiction changed from when you were a first responder to now being a therapist working in treatment? Good question, Lauren.
That is a great question. And, working, I don't think back in the day I paid too much attention to it. And I think as I started to grow in this field, I really noticed more of a connection. So, my views have completely changed. Before I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Now it's what I do. So it's really changed my life.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of first responders, friends or families of first responders listening now, or maybe listening to us later on. And maybe there's a little fear that, if they go into treatment or if they seek help, they won't be able to return back to that job. And I want to make sure that we quell that. Although there's some people that I'm sure that maybe couldn't, but it's not the idea that we take them away from what they love doing. Is that true? I mean, we want to get them back doing what they love.
Absolutely. I mean, that's correct. It's not about taking them away, destroying careers. It's just about getting them the help they need. And actually, we can also do what's called installments. And installments actually provide a link to somebody who's in an environment. I'll give you, for instance, I had a prison guard who used to trigger every time the door slammed to the prison because he knew what was coming. So he would trigger and then he'd pop into prison guard mode. And, you never knew whether your other guards were going to be attacked or what took place. So for a coping mechanism, without him having to call himself out per se when he was stressed out, we linked a positive thought to his badge. So what he would do is when he felt stressed out, we linked that thought to his badge. He would simply touch his badge and remember his roots and take that positive notion. That was a kind of a quiet way for him to cope.
Well, that's amazing.
That's real good. Another question here. Once a first responder receives treatment, how long should he or she wait before returning back to work?
Good question. Individualized. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it depends on the severity of the trauma. It depends on, how they've worked through, what they've done in the program, how they've worked. So again, when we talk therapeutically, we really have to look at situations individually.
Okay.
Now, being in working with first responders, being a first responder and everything else, can you see, and we're not going to talk about specific numbers because we don't have those in front of us, so we don't want to do that, but can you see where the level of stress actually contributes to addiction and it really kind of leads down that path?
Yeah.
Because there's no coping skills in place? I mean, maybe that's something that all first responders need let a better grip on themselves anyway, but do you think there's a higher rate, possibly, of addiction and problems?
Absolutely. I do think there's a higher rate, particularly alcohol. That's what I've seen, but that doesn't preclude from, any other drugs or prescribed medications. There's cycles as to how this works. I'll give you another, for instance, where a detective had said that one of his other detectives had administered within a month period 1,200 doses of Narcan. And so
wow.
it's a
That's huge
amount.
Wow.
And so now we can see the cycle, whereas this detective was traumatized by the administration of death experiences.
To say the
And
least.
so he takes that home. And then again, it affects the family, and he starts, using substances, and so the cycle continues. So it's a big problem.
What clinical modalities are most effective in first responders?
Yeah. Again, EMDR is extremely important. Brain spotting is extremely important. Again, I like to use combinations of cognitive behavioral therapy with that, and rational emotive behavioral therapy, and other different approaches. But for trauma, EMDR and brain spotting are very, very effective.
And what are your views on EMDR? And tell us a little about brain spotting, what it actually is and what it does for the first responder.
Okay, so EMDR is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And basically, EMDR uses what we call bilateral stimulation. It was discovered that this bilateral stimulation helped process what was stuck in the brain. I don't want to go too deep in the levels, but this method of back and forth movement, and this started becoming, this was building and building and building, and now after about 25 years, 30 years, been an accepted modality and used in the military and by the VA and first responders. So this notion of this bilateral movement of eyes, some people do just eyes, some people do eyes, sound. I'm of the type that I like to use as many of the human senses as possible, because I feel that when a trauma takes place, the senses are involved. So if I can use that, I'll do that. So that would be EMDR. Now, brain spotting is kind of an offshoot of EMDR. It was discovered through EMDR, where a certain focal point was concentrated on, and the eyes would mimic the spot in the brain, deep in the brain, in the subconscious, where that particular trauma was held in like a capsule. And so the patient will focus on that focal point and open up that capsule and release that trauma from a deeper mindset. So these are the easy way to explain them without going too deep in the clinical bit.
Now, Bart, I want to get back to the first responders on the job. Mm-hmm. In my experience and people that I've met, and I'm sure all of us, these people are highly dedicated to their jobs in most cases, probably in all, but very dedicated to their jobs. So you may not see problems in their performance at work. But just because you're not seeing the problems in the performance at work, don't ignore the things that are going on in their lives when they leave work, because that's where you see a lot of the release of the addiction, the trauma, and everything else when they get home to their wives or when they hit the bar every day. But just because their performance at work is good, don't ignore it. That's what I'm trying to say. You agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, families should be extremely cognizant and aware of changes in behavior of their loved ones who are first responders. And if they start seeing changes in isolation and irritability and anger and, all of these signals, then, there's something to be looked at. If it does start going into the job itself and, captains and higher-ups become more aware of it, they'll address it.
Should the family members of first responders seek therapy also?
I think that's a great idea. I think that regardless substance abuse or not, that this is still family oriented, and the more the family can work together at this and understand it, the better.
Are there support groups out there and programs available to the families?
Very little. Very little support groups for the first responders. There are some groups in which they've created on their own. I heard of there was one in Deerfield Beach, I believe, of some retirees that get together on a beach and they have kind of a group. Right. I don't know if they go too deep into it. I haven't been, but I think they have little pods, but nothing.
Now, obviously, in the first responder program, though, you encourage a lot of, and you do a lot of family contact in the program while they're here.
Absolutely, as much as possible. Again, it's keeping the family cohesive, because if the first responder's pulling away from the family and isolating, that's really not going to be healthy.
Now, actually, I'm going to throw the question at you too, Scott, because you work with the police department up in New York.
Sure.
What does a person do who doesn't know who to call or what to do? Let's say it's maybe a wife, maybe a son or a daughter, or maybe a friend who sees somebody going the wrong direction. What do they do? I mean, if they have no experience in what to do, who can they turn to?
Well, I think it's very tough. When a friend sees something, it's a hard call. Nobody ever wants to blow the whistle on a friend or a family member and think that that person's going to get kicked off the force, lose their badge, and their gun. The officer himself can get help, though. They can go into their EAP official and just let them know there's a problem. They will never lose their job. They might have their gun taken away and their badge for a period of time till they complete our treatment program, but they're going to get it back. So you don't have to worry about, hey, I'm never going to be on the force again. I lost my career, and I'm never going to be on that truck or that station. You will have your job back. You're not going to get fired. You just have to ask for help before it's too late. Don't let something happen. Ask for help. We're here to help you. And that's what we do at PPA.
I agree. I think that's exactly the case. And contacting your unions, that's going to be a huge step. And they'll support you.
Those unions definitely they have everything in place to help.
They do, and we get a lot of support from all the unions and the members, and they believe in what we're doing. And it's a different way of thinking than it was 30, 40 years ago. That if you have an addiction problem or an alcohol problem, you're off the force, and good luck to you finding another career. It's not like that anymore. We take care of our own, and we make sure that they get on the right path and get them back on the job as fast as possible. Well, I want to thank you, Bart, for being here. You've been a terrific guest. The questions are still coming in. We can do this for another 2 hours, it looks like. But we will answer all the questions that we are receiving. And if anybody would like to know any more about us, please contact us here at TPA, and we'll be glad to help you out.
Great. Thanks for having me.
There's a lot more we can talk about, so we'll have to do this again.
Even SoberSmash.